Why so serious? If you're an avid movie watcher like I am, but even if you're not, it is really difficult to not be acquainted with one of the most psychotic fictional villain of all time, the Joker. When discussing the Joker character, authors, critics, comic fans, and the general public often refer to him as a psychopath. What does it mean to be a psychopath? Well, the term psychopath or sociopath is not listed in the DSM or other medical reference sources. Instead, the terms are referred to as antisocial personality disorder, ASPD, which is generally defined as a long-term disregard, violation, or abuse of the rights of others. People diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy also show a low sense of morals or ethics and often lack the level of conscience that most people possess. This condition is usually accompanied by criminal or violent behaviors. Hence, this is the sole reason why most people tend to associate the Joker and the psychopathy in one sentence. The most common archetype of manifestation of psychopath is in the serial killer. During the 60s and 70s, serial killers were at the forefront of the public mind. Shortly thereafter, names like the Zodiac Killer, John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, and the son of Sam Killer become household names. In the early 2000s and beyond, serial killers become the focus of many popular TV series and documentaries. Numerous books have been written on the subject, both academic and for popular consumption, and the interest does not seem to be waning. The truth is, whether it be an old boss, co-worker, friend, or even partner, most people have known at least one psychopath in their lifetime. Not all psychopaths or sociopaths turn out to be murderers and criminals. Some people are able to harness their complete disregard for others to their advantage and achieve success in certain environments. Still, one of the most commonly asked questions in regards to this topic is whether psychopaths are created or born. It's a classic nature versus nurture debate which becomes even more interesting when applied to this subject. Here we will examine this question and hopefully add some clarity to the issue. Let's first eyeball this issue from the aspect of genetics. A true psychopath is rare. Only about 1% of the population can be confidently diagnosed with ASPD. From this 1%, scientists have been able to perform brain scans and determine there are some striking differences between the brains of those with ASPD and neurotypical individuals. The scans concluded that two main regions of the brain, in particular the ventromedial and anterior cingulate sectors of prefrontal cortex, theorized to mediate a number of social and affective decision-making functions that appear to be disrupted in psychopathy. So, in a circumstance where empathy and remorse were naturally granted to be expressed, neurons firing activity is increased in normal people, while reduced firing or none at all were shown in these parts of the brain of a psychopath. Another interesting aspect of a psychopath's brain is their inability to perceive or register the emotions of other people. The human brain is acutely aware of minor changes in an individual's face. Things we cannot consciously pick up on are noticed by the brain. Many studies have shown that people engage in a small form of mimic to help the brain better understand the emotional state of the person they are viewing. People with ASPD seem to lack the ability to draw any information from minor facial mimicking. They, however, can understand mood, state, and emotional on an intellectual level and often use this understanding to manipulate people for their benefit. An interesting observation made some decades ago is that when people with ASPD are asked to draw cartoon face representations of emotional states such as joy, sadness, fear, anxiety, guilt, and pleasure, but they often draw identical or minutely different faces. There seems to be something fundamentally wrong with a psychopath's ability to interpret the feelings of other people, hence why serial killers often mistook their victims' scared faces as happiness and pleasure to be involved in those terrifying last few moments of their life. Even as the latest advancement of science ensued, it is still unclear to physicians and scientists alike to what level psychopaths experience these emotions. Thus, both of these evidences justify that psychopathy might just be a genetic condition that is embedded in the DNA of some people. Nevertheless, we must not neglect the possible nurture aspects that could drive certain types of people to embrace the inner psychopath within them. Having the genetic disposition to ASPD is necessary but not sufficient condition to becoming a psychopath. There appears to be an environmental component that triggers the mindset or the once dormant part of psychopathy within in many of those affected with ASPD. The most common of these environmental triggers is trauma. One of the authors of the landmark study of 50 serial killers, Michael G. Emmett, explained, "Our data showed that a much higher percentage of serial killers were abused as children than the population in general. It certainly makes sense that the type of abuse received as a child, whether it is physical, sexual, or even psychological, could influence a serial killer's behavior and choice of victim. Take the example of the murderer Richard the Night Stalker Ramirez from El Paso, Texas. Found guilty of murdering 13 people in San Francisco and Los Angeles, Ramirez had a disturbed childhood enduring brutal beatings by his father. In the meanwhile, serial killer duo Otis Toole and Henry Lee Lucas, who are believed to have murdered hundreds of people, were both victims of physical and psychological abuse in which they were specifically made to dress up as young girls and then beaten." In regards to these histories of abuse as a child in psychopaths and serial killers, humiliation on top from the damage done to them cling on afterwards, which boosted these individuals to resort to abnormal coping mechanism known as intentional animal torture and cruelty, IATC. When the science of behavioral profiling began to emerge in the 1970s, one of the most consistent findings reported by the FBI profiling unit was that childhood IATC appeared to be a common behavior among serial murderers and rapists. Many notorious serial killers, such as Jeffrey Dahmer, began by torturing and killing animals in their childhood. Dahmer also collected animal roadkill, dissected the remains, and masturbated over the animals he had cut up. Other killers known to have engaged in childhood IATC include child murderer Mary Bell, who throttled pigeons, Jamie Bulger's murderer Robert Thompson, who was cruel to household pets, and Moore's murderer Ian Brandy, who abused animals. IATC is one of the three adolescent behaviors in what is often referred to as the homicidal triad, the other two being persistent bedwetting and obsessive fire setting. Some criminologists and psychologists believe that the combination of two or more of these three behaviors increases the risk of homicidal behavior in adult life, hence emphasizing that a history of childhood maltreatment leads to a lifetime worth of cycle of violence. In a nutshell, well, yes or no. The same platitude can be applied to the psychopath questions. It appears that there is a requirement for a genetic, physical, and social combination to result in antisocial personality disorder. Generalizing the cause of criminal behavior would be presumptuous and inaccurate of us, but the link between childhood abuse and serial killing has been apparent in many studies over the decades. Whether genetic investigations like brain scans or behavioral studies to gauge serial killer tendencies prove to be groundbreaking in criminal profiling and crime prevention remains to be seen. Beyond certain common personality traits, serial killers are unique, shaped by their own extraordinary experiences, circumstances, and mindsets. With that being said, those born with the genes and perhaps associated brain structures of a psychopath are not guaranteed to become one. Likewise, those who suffer some form of childhood trauma or abuse are also not likely to become psychopaths. It is when both these conditions are met that psychopathy occurs. Thank you for listening. Assalamualaikum and goodbye.